Do you run out of air when you're playing the flute? If you do, this is a really common problem, and it usually does not mean that you don't hold enough air in your lungs. Usually it's caused because we're not using our air efficiently enough. So a lot of times there's too much tension in our throat or our embouchure. Sometimes it's because the air direction is not optimal, or sometimes it's just using too much air. So if you think back to when you first started playing flute, a lot of times our playing was like this. Do you remember those first days when you couldn't get a sound out? And you were just desperately sort of blowing at the lip plate and hoping for the best? A lot of us have kind of taken that energy forward with us. Even though we're no longer beginners, we're still sort of blowing more air than we actually need to get the note. So if I'm trying for a G, which is what I was sort of blowing at before, if I adjust the angle of the air, I can actually get the note with a minuscule, teeny tiny amount of air. And I can play the note for a very long time. I could keep going, right? The main point is you can play and get a clean, clear sound with a teeny tiny amount of air. What that means, though, is that we do have to refine our embouchure. So think back to your early flute playing days, and your embouchure was probably not very focused. There was a lot of cheek stuff going on. There was just sort of a floppy embouchure happening. So instead, if we focus here, not tension, but focus, you can see the aperture here is a little bit smaller as opposed to this, where the aperture is very big. So I'm just closing the aperture a bit. Again, not thinking tight, because then you get that sound. So we want it to be focused, but not tight. And just blow less air. Something that also can happen is if we have tension in the throat. So throat tension can be detected by a sore throat after you're playing, or if you hear sounds, if you hear vocalization while you're playing. Sometimes people make sounds with their throat when they're playing, and most of the time that's because there's tension there. So if you're hearing yourself making those vocalizations, then there is something to address, and you just want to make sure that your throat muscles are super relaxed. Last thing to quickly check is that the direction of your air is correct for the note that you're playing. So if I'm playing a low note and my air is going too far across the tube, it's going to be really hard for that note to come out, and I'm going to waste a lot of air. So again, our general rule for notes, the low notes, the air needs to go a bit more into the tube. For the middle notes, a little bit more across. And then for the high notes, a lot more across. So if I'm trying for that low G, I don't want to blow the air across the tube. I want to blow a little bit more air into the tube. And I'm using just a fraction of the air that I was using before when it sounded really airy and unfocused. So those are some things to try. If you find yourself running out of air super fast, check your amount of air. So you probably don't need to be blowing quite as much as you are. Check the direction, the angle of the air, and make sure it's appropriate for the register that you're playing in. And then watch for tension. So tension in the embouchure or tension in the throat. All right, so try that out. Let me know how it works, and we'll see you next time.